Once again, good morning. Once again, good morning, everyone. It's good to have everybody back this morning. I hope you enjoyed your break. In addition to your conference registration fees, our sponsors help pay the bill for some of our beverage breaks and meals and everything that we do here at Convocation. Let's give a round of applause to all of our sponsors. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Brother Chris Patiño, who is a De La Salle Christian brother. He is well known to us here with the NRVC as he served for 6 years as the West Coast Member Area Coordinator. In addition, he also served on the presentation team for the new Vocation Director Orientation Program from 2019 to 2021. And then in 2022, he was honored with the Outstanding Recognition Award here at NRVC at our last convocation. We asked Brother Chris if he would offer an international, global perspective on religious life to widen our North American perspectives and our narratives to focus more on the cultural wealth of discerners, newer entrants, and of professed members of all generations. Instead of seeing our ministry through the lens of an aging diminishment, I'll get that word, we could offer a framework to understanding the gifts of diversity that are already offered in the church and in the world. We are grateful that Brother Chris said yes to once again help us with the NRVC as he focuses his presentation on Leaven of Hope, envisaging and engendering an open world. At the end of Brother Chris's presentation, we will have some breakout groups to ponder 4 reflection questions that he will give us at the end of his presentation. There will be time to choose between 2 groups, so please consider which groups you'd like to join, and they're located on page 14 of your worship and program aid. Brother Chris will give more information at the end of his presentation, but for now, please join me standing, and let's give a blessing to Brother Chris. Our song is found on page 514 in Breaking Bread. We welcome Brother Chris.
Dream, brother. Dream, sister. Dream. Look to the future, opening new horizons. Like the grain of wheat dies to give life, help us, Lord, to be a small seed, simple, tender, happy. Help us to allow love to envelop our lives. Sisters and brothers, it is a privilege to have this time with you. I wish to express the gratitude to the NRBC board and staff for the invitation and confidence that I may have something, hopefully, to contribute to this year's convocation. I'll surely do my best. Before starting, though, just a little orientation and a confession. So, as Len mentioned, when Sister Debbie wrote to me to make the invitation was in part to offer an international global perspective on religious life that widens North American narratives, and to provide a framework that helps us recognize what diversity and its gifts offer the church and world as opposed to a deficit perspective. Sister Debbie, I did my best to complete the assignment, but as any good teacher, you engage the learners in the learning process. So I think what you'll find in the keynote is that I'll lean heavily on the first part as I seek to offer a reflective perspective on the global dynamics the church and religious life experience today. My hope is that as I address different points, the elements for a framework that help us understand the gifts of diversity will surface, especially through the personal reflection, the breakout sessions, the sharing, and the open dialogue. As a good teacher, I remind you to take notes. Let me begin with the title of the presentation, Leaven of Hope, Envisaging and Engendering an Open World. In line with the convocation's theme, Walking Humbly Together takes its inspiration from two sources. First, from my own congregation's reflection, the Leavening Project, which we recently began to reframe as a leavening movement. It's a reflection that our Superior General and his council developed as a response to the mandate from our most recent general chapter, which called us to create new pathways to transform lives. We offer it to our global Lasallian family and all those who join us in our educational mission as a primary methodology by which to renew our fraternal life and mission. And I wish to use its underlying message as a means by which we can to consider how we can walk humbly together. A few sections from the reflection that I offer to contextualize this morning's presentation and will hopefully contribute to what follows both in the presentation and our subsequent sessions together. What we propose is a convergent movement that, from small things, can transform us from within as we make room for the Holy Spirit of God, who is the true leaven, a way of being and walking together in the discovery and encounter with God, especially with those who are on the peripheries. The key and motivating question of the Leavening Project is the same one that God asked Cain. Where is your brother? Read from the event of Jesus Christ, we discovered this question that is repeated again and again in the journey of Jesus. In the face of the wounded man by the side of the road, the Syrophoenician woman, the sleeping girl, the widow who gives everything, the tax collector who shares his goods, the young man who comes with great anxiety, the 10 lepers, the blind man. And it is in this reading of Jesus that we draw our inspiration. So at the question, where is your brother? Where is your sister? May be a question that makes us uncomfortable, moves us, unsettles us, and helps us to discern our place in the world. We want the Leavening Project to help us to walk and to go out with our own vulnerability, with our limits, with our own fragilities, with our own poverty. Essentially, we want it to be a project that helps us to transform our interior life, to generate life by committing ourselves radically in our daily lives to the collective construction of a fraternal world that practices justice, peace, and care for the common home. Friends, these are the gospel-inspired invitations that can transform us into leaven of hope. The life-giving leaven that our world needs and that can inspire others in their own journeys. And I want to emphasize the smallness when speaking of leavening. How many bakers in the room? So you can correct me about this all later after the presentation, about what I'll say right now. So I'm not a baker. So I had to look up how much yeast is needed for a typical bread recipe. And most recipe sources cited 1% per kilogram of flour. That's to say 1 teaspoon for every 4 cups of flour. That's all it takes. And if we consider the kneading and the time for fermentation, we can consider this leavening perhaps more profoundly as it relates to our own lives. That small can be beautiful. That less can be more. To consider the labor of love that comes from the shaking and pressing the dough once the yeast has been thrown in and the time it needs to carry out its effect. How have our life journeys, especially our lives of faith and as consecrated religious, asked of our smallness or been shaken by the Spirit's kneading within us, or has required our patience with God's providence? So I invite us to hold on to this sense of leavening as we make our way through the presentation. The second part of the title, Envisaging and Engendering an Open World, comes from the papal encyclical Fratelli Tutti. It is a title of chapter 3 of the encyclical. And so just 3 brief selections I offer here for our consideration. Fratelli Tutti tells us our love for others, for who they are, moves us to seek the best for their lives. Only by cultivating this way of relating to one another will we make possible a social friendship that excludes no one and a fraternity that is open to all. Love also impels us towards universal communion. No one can mature or find fulfillment by withdrawing from others. By its very nature, love calls for growth in openness and the ability to accept others as part of a continuing adventure that makes every periphery converge in a greater sense of mutual belonging. As Jesus told us, you are all brothers. This need to transcend our own limitations also applies to different regions and countries. Indeed, the ever-increasing number of interconnections and communications in today's world makes us powerfully aware of the unity and common destiny of the nations. In the dynamics of history and the diversity of ethnic groups, societies, and cultures, we see the seeds of a vocation to form a community composed of brothers and sisters who accept and care for one another. Fraternity is a missionary invitation. The invitation to foster fraternity, to a mission of love that recognizes the dignity of each person. As religious, we are in a privileged position to respond to this invitation. And I believe this is what motivates each of us to continue to trust that God continues to offer his loving call for others to join us in the religious life. It is with these two convictions, the need to be leaven of hope and the call to foster fraternity as imperative to what is needed from religious life today, that I wish to situate the rest of our time together. And so, embracing our smallness, a new profound reality. I do not need to dwell on the fact that statistically, in terms of membership, religious congregations have dramatically reduced in number. We all know this, and many in this room have lived through dramatic change. Each of our congregations has responded according to what our leaders and members felt the Spirit seeking of us amid the change. Today, our congregations continue to adapt, restructure, and carry out the apostolic mission with the same attentiveness to the Holy Spirit's guidance and what it may be seeking of our unique charisms. If I can, for a moment, share some statistics. These come from the church's statistics as published in the 2023 Pontifical Yearbook. Of course, they published the 2024 statistics just last week, but we're going to get to 2023 statistics here. It gives you a sense, and I think the dynamics are similar from the most recent statistics. First, in terms of world population and Catholics as it relates to the world population. You see there some dynamics. First column, world population or population of the continent. Catholics, which gives you the change from the previous statistics, and the percentage of Catholics within the continental population. A little more closer to home for us, men and women religious. And this is men religious non-ordained. They categorize the ordained members as part of the priest statistics. Members of secular institutes. And our ordained members. So recognizing it's not about the numbers, we can acknowledge that the reality of less vowed members impacts mission, community life, and our spiritual journeys. Yet we know examples of religious congregations taking prophetic steps amid the pain of loss and letting go to live into a new reality. And while we're not immune to the individualism and secularization that societies experience today, nor the psychological impact on morale, at times the diminishment in numbers have been an opportunity to foster a deeper prayer life, live community life more intentionally, and an invitation to shared mission with non-vowed members who find meaning and purpose through our apostolic ministry and the spirituality of our charisms. This has called us to rediscover Jesus and the gospel mission again and again. It has meant questioning how we live religious life. Do our lived realities bring us closer to the marginalized? Do they foster encounters with those on the peripheries? Do they provoke integral ecological conversion? And when new members join us, do they find in us life-generating faith and zeal? The smallness has also been an opportunity to explore new ventures and inter-congregational projects. It has caused many of our congregations to shift our gaze from the places where we were traditionally large in number to other parts of the world, where today our newer members are larger in number, often the global south. This has brought the grace and challenge of diversity and interculturality. As we know, there are other concurrent shifts religious life experiences as we become smaller in membership size. In his address to the Salesians of Don Bosco at their general chapter in 2020, Cardinal Joel Braz de Avis, the prefect of the Dicastery for Institutes and Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, observed and affirmed another reality religious life experiences today. He says, in the new season of openness and dialogue with the world, consecrated life felt pushed to the forefront of exploring the coordinates of a new church-world relationship to the benefit of the whole ecclesial body. Along these lines of dialogue, acceptance, consecrated life has normally, if not always, willingly embraced the risks of this new adventure of openness, listening, and service. He goes on to say the charisms and the spiritual patrimony of consecrated life in this new climate have been confidently put at the disposal of this new relationship. But at the same time, it has required taking the risks of these new paths. In her presentation, Discerning Our Emerging Future, Learnings from the Journey at this past summer's LCWR Assembly, Sister Anne Moonley reflected, we are living at a cross point in religious life, a liminal time of endings and of beginnings, a time for taking stock of our own realities and the realities that surround us, a time to focus on the essence of our call and mission as we navigate the many transitions that we are experiencing personally, congregationally, and across the broader spectrum of religious life. The emerging future is already here, and our challenge is to embrace our vocational call fully as we live into the future with faith and trust in the God who is with us as we journey. I acknowledge that all this is not new for us. We have been living it and seeking to respond according to the realities of our particular congregations. You, as vocation ministers, are often called to take what we are experiencing within and convey a message of hope, to accompany others in the discernment as we try to make sense of the Spirit's working in the institutional dynamics of our congregations and religious life today. It is for this reason that we must recognize where the leaven of hope is already fermenting and transforming. Pope Francis reminds us as consecrated persons All of us are aware of the multicultural transformation we are experiencing. No one doubts this. Hence, it is all the more important for consecrated men and women to be one with Jesus in their lives and in the midst of these great challenges. Our mission, in accordance with each particular charism, reminds us that we are called to be leaven in this dough. Perhaps there are better brands of flour, but the Lord has called us to be leaven here and now with the challenges we face, not on the defensive or motivated by fear, but with our hands on the plow, helping the wheat to grow, even though it has frequently been sown among wheat. I think this is why in many parts of the world, we continue to attract vocations. Yes, even here. There continues to be a need for life-giving leaven where the dough rises as food for the world. Perhaps we can consider the feeding of the multitude from this perspective. It was not about how many loaves and fishes were available. It was about turning to Christ, trusting in his abundant compassion, that the good Lord is ever faithful and even in our smallness can do great things. Are we able and willing to acknowledge our smallness and believe that even so God will transform us into food for the world? Not because of the number of ministries we have, the number of new vocations, but because of the faith by which we are led to embrace our smallness and allow God's transformative spirit to send us forth. This past August, I was in Sri Lanka getting to know the reality of our brothers in educational mission there. We visited each of the communities, and I remember being deeply impacted when visiting one of the communities with 4 brothers, a young community with probably an average age of 32. What most impressed me was the fact that this small community served different schools. On Sundays, each brother taught catechesis at the local parish. On Wednesdays, when they had Mass in their community chapel, invited neighbors and other religious to join them. And on different occasions, joined other groups for Eucharist and communal celebrations. In South Sudan, we have a high school where there are currently 2 brothers, one from Nigeria and one from India, a Venezuelan brother joining them later this week. In the smallness that is that community and the bareness that is the land, they seek to carry out a transformative educational mission. The Loreto sisters down the road are doing the same on an even larger scale. But together, they are the anchors for the local South Sudanese Dinka community. Together, they are fostering peace and creating hope in a nation that has been scarred by violence and suffering. I can tell you many stories, but it is a sense of togetherness that has stood out greatly for me during each of my visits. While there are inter-congregational projects and communities, things such as the Solidarity with South Sudan initiative, the incredible way I see the various congregations support one another. Not necessarily ministerially working at the same project, but by the attentiveness to one another. Shows the great diversity and compassion we have for one another. To me, these instances illustrate what Pope Francis invites us to when he calls on men and women, consecrated men and women, to frequent the future without losing sight of the present nor the wisdom of the past. Frequent the future without losing sight of the present nor the wisdom of the past. To live now what can be, should be, and needs to be. There are also examples to underscore that our smallness can be transformed and significant. As Marianist Father Jose Maria Arnaiz noted when addressing the Daughters of St. Paul at their 10th General Chapter, beyond being necessary or important, what matters is to be relevant in our particular missions, seen as a contribution to society and a possible means of favoring its transformation. It means being significant to the poor, getting involved with them, and burning our bridges. This is where our future lies, and the opportunity of becoming evangelizing leaven. It could be that young religious are finding a new way of being so, and those more advanced in age are not able to see it or interpret it. Do have to share, though, that last line there, that our Vicar General once quipped, "I have met several 70-year-old brothers who live their vocation as if they were 30, and some 30-year-old brothers who live as if they are 70-year-olds. So the fire of our vocation is not limited to age." So sisters and brothers, I want to conclude this first part of the presentation by inviting us to consider this call to be leaven of hope. 2 questions for reflection that I offer you. I'm going to give you just 5-7 minutes of quiet time to consider these. These will be part of our conversation as well in the breakout sessions. So considering its recent history, how has your congregation experienced life-giving leavening? And in your experience of accompanying discerners, what seems to be the leaven of hope they are seeking from us, and how does this impact vocation ministry? So I want to give us 5-7 minutes quiet. Of course, if you need to stand up, please feel free to use the restroom, but 5-7 minutes and we'll continue. Give us 2 more minutes. So I imagine that most of us did not imagine we would be learning so much about yeast and corn at this year's NRVC Convocation. So we'll move to our second part, communion, envisaging and engendering an open world. If I could start with quoting the most recent United Nations Human Development Report, which observes, "The choice is not between global interdependence and complete national self-reliance. It is between continuing business as usual or taking seriously the challenge of building systems and institutions that are resilient and adaptable to an evolving context." The report adds, "Reduce global exchange and cooperation in favor of isolated nationalism are unlikely to help us face the challenges that arise from the current drivers of interdependence. In a globally interdependent world, we need to identify and pursue our shared problems and how to address them." With this in mind, let us consider then the international dimension of many of our religious congregations. What opportunities do we have to envisage and engender an open world? We're in a privileged position to witness to the possibility of fraternal harmony. This is a clear mission that we must fully embrace. I return to Fratelli Tutti, which reminds us, no one can experience the true beauty of life without relating to others, without having real faces to love. This is part of the mystery of authentic human existence. Life exists where there is bonding, communion, fraternity, and life is stronger than death when it is built on true relationships and bonds of fidelity. In this spirit, I often recall the words of Cardinal Czerny, the prefect for the Dicastery for Human Development, who shared with us at our 46th General Chapter, referring to Fratelli Tutti, he reflected, "Your primary role is to prepare us to live as siblings in society, not to live comfortably or even morally at home privately, but to live as siblings in society. Because to compress the Holy Father's teaching very briefly, because if we do not learn to live as siblings in society, then we and the planet are finished." I can defend every word of that with pages and pages, but that's the summary. If we do not learn to live as siblings in society, we and the planet are finished. You have taken up the responsibility of teaching us to live as siblings in society. beyond personal success, beyond being smart, maybe even, I dare say, beyond being moral. But we have to learn to live together in society. As religious, do we not have the opportunity to be a microcosm of what the world needs? To allow our witness, humbly and with the grace of the Holy Spirit, to transform the church and our societies. This requires us to consider our own communities and areas where we need our own conversion towards more deeply living as brothers, as sisters, as siblings, in the words of the Cardinal. Let me briefly return to these statistics, focusing on the women religious column. It is clear where there is slight to moderate growth. We see it in Asia and Africa, where there is great decline. America and Europe, here it lumps together South America and North America. So we can assume that perhaps much of the decline in America is happening in the US and Canada. And looking at some of the data from the Latin American Episcopal Conference and using these numbers, they identify that about 2/3 of the 145,000 plus women religious in the Americas are in Latin America and the Caribbean. So that's to say, when we add the number of women religious in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Asia, we're speaking about slightly more than 50% of the total women religious are outside the US and Europe. If we do the math with the men religious, it's very, very similar. Therefore, when we consider the faith-filled women and men who in the midst of that seek to join us, aware of the larger numbers in the global South, how do our individual communities embrace this gift of hope? How do we open our minds and hearts to the vision and the dreams they bring? How do we foster mutual accompaniment that allows each community to grow in solidarity with one another? In my recent experiences, many new vocations outside of our context here in the US are significantly younger and come with the gifts and challenges of their cultural realities and pressures. The easy thing may be to begin with the litany of all the things they should do, what the formation program should fix, ways they should adapt and integrate, and only because I've heard it from some of my own brothers, preconceived notions and rash judgments about their intentions and cultural dynamics. To share a recent experience, earlier this year I was visiting our brothers in Pakistan. Dynamic group of about 25 brothers carrying out our educational mission with the focus on those in situations of poverty, education for girls, and catechetical training. All in a country where Christianity is a minority, yet beautifully witnessing to the possibility of interreligious harmony. Aware of the judgments I heard related to some of the dynamics in the sector, toward the end of my visit, I met with the younger members, about 15 of the 25. And the thought as I listened to them occurred to me about the internal tension these brothers must live with. That is a tension of societal expectations, at times the expectations from their own families to become some sort of provider, with the expectations and ideals of religious life. For me, it raised a critical question. How do we accompany this tension? How do we ensure that we have those who can accompany them well into hopefully a certain integration and overall growth? Who are those who can walk humbly with them? I share this because as we seek to envisage and engender an open world, as we seek to witness to sisterly and brotherly harmony, we must walk together on the journey recognizing that we are all on the way. This includes the self-awareness to recognize our own attitudes and biases, especially as we become more and more diverse and intercultural. This requires the personal and communal work that I know many of you are already doing. Along these lines, written more than 10 years ago for the Union of Superior Generals Bulletin, the former Superior General of the Divine Word Missionaries, Father Antonio Pernilla, but I think just as relevant today, says, while there are practical advantages to internationality, its real value is the witness it gives to the universality and openness to the diversity of the kingdom of God. This witness is especially urgent in the context of globalization, which tends, on the one hand, to exclude, on the other hand, to eliminate all differences. In view of this, there's particular need today to witness that God's kingdom is a kingdom of love that includes absolutely everyone, and at the same time is open to the particularity of every person and people. A challenge along this path includes ensuring our accompaniment and formation processes are attentive to and integrate interculturality and the realities of intergenerational living. Another challenge that sometimes our institutionalization and the vastness of our congregations can turn us inward to maintain and sustain rather than to create and renew. Can we therefore begin by shifting our gaze and recognizing the well springs of hope that invite us to encounter in new and different ways the life-giving waters of the one who first called us? Because this is to recognize those simple yet profound words in the letter of St. John. We love because he first loved us. And it means investing hope in those who are a source of hope. In a similar vein, as a reminder of the work of the church we are to carry out, the final document from the recent concluded Synod on Synodality articulates for us that a synodal church is characterized as a space in which relationships can flourish, thanks to the mutual love that constitutes the new commandment left by Jesus to his disciples. Religious life, through its distinct vocational witness, should then be more and more a living testimony of a church where sisterly and brotherly relationships flourish. Speaking directly about the role of consecrated life in a synodal church, and I believe very much in line with the call to envisage and engender an open world, the final document says this: consecrated life is called to challenge the church and society with its prophetic voice. In their secular experience, religious families have matured, tested practices of synodal life and community discernment, learning to harmonize individual gifts and common mission. Orders and congregations, societies of apostolic life, secular institutes, as well as associations, movements, and new communities have a special contribution to make to the growth of synodality in the church. Today, many communities of consecrated life are a laboratory of interculturality that constitutes a prophecy for the church and the world. At the same time, synodality invites and sometimes challenges the pastors of the local churches, as well as those in charge of consecrated life and ecclesial aggregations, to strengthen relationships so as to give rise to an exchange of gifts at the service of the common mission. We have a gift and responsibility at a time of great distress in our world, where conflict and war, societal polarization, and vicious political rhetoric, and violence of all types constantly confront us. In this context, and on the verge of a divisive election, the world will need the gospel witness, prophetic audacity, the Christian hope that religious life has often provided. This requires the conviction and courage to move from the I and they to an us, from a goodwill charity to a deeper sense of solidarity, and from any isolationism to radical inclusivity. Can we embrace this mission? Sisters and brothers, as we invite and accompany, let us envisage and engender an open world by walking humbly together with open eyes, open ears, open hearts, recognizing the leaven of hope that we are to be, and that is the cultural wealth of discerners, newer entrants, and professed members of all generations. In this way, the gospel words of Jesus are loudly proclaimed through our witness. This is a time of fulfillment. The kingdom of God is at hand. And so I leave you with the last two questions. Considering religious life today, especially its global nature, how are we, as consecrated persons, being called to be leaven of hope for the church and world? How might this influence how you approach vocation ministry? And from your perspective and experience, what does envisaging and engendering an open world mean for religious life and for how we accompany others in their vocational journey? So before we break into the breakout rooms, I think it's important to allow time for quiet silence. So again, about 5 minutes just to ponder these questions or what you've heard or what the lunch menu is. So whatever you feel like pondering these next 5 minutes. terms of process, before Father Mario walks us through the instructions, just to say that when we come back at 2 o'clock, we'll have some time for your reflections, both based on the breakout group conversations, but perhaps anything that you would add from your perspective as it relates to what's been offered this morning, and of course, any questions that you may have. So let Father Mario take it over from here.
Yes, thank you for applauding Brother Chris. I know it's not for me, but we thank Brother Chris for his time and for the gift of his experience. As a Franciscan, I totally sit with the smallness, the 1%, and recognizing that smallness can do and bring about transformation. We have 2 announcements before we break into our groups. The first is our menu choices for lunch at 12:30. We like to share these choices with you so that everyone has the ability to choose items that they can enjoy for a healthy meal instead of walking through the line without knowing what the choices are. There are, especially if you have dietary preferences or needs. We will ask you at this time, we will have 2 45-minute break groups. And those questions, hopefully all of you were very studious students and took notes, but there was one set of questions and then this set of questions. Just want to, by raise of hands, did everyone get the 4 questions? If you did not, do you need the questions? You have all 4 questions? Thank you. Just want to make sure that people got the questions. You need them? I'll get them to you. So we will break into sections, into groups this afternoon to continue or this morning still, to continue the conversation. The conversation with your group, you're welcome to stay there the entire time until 12:30, but at 11:45, we will note the time, the facilitators will note the time, and it's your choice whether you want to move into another group as you would like. And so we will be breaking up into different groups, and we all have different signs. So if I'll get the table facilitators, and then where we're gonna meet as well, I'll be announcing. So Park Ballroom, Brother John and Brother Joseph, they're there. So you'll follow. Brothers will go with them, and guests and lay vocations directors. Oh, lay vocation director, sorry. Guests will go with Sister Debbie and Phil. Yeah. You see, as a priest, I'm so accustomed to not read the red. The Roman Missal, everything in red you do not read out loud. And so I'm like, oh. Note for Sister Debbie. I saw red, I'm like, okay, keep on going. Lay vocations will be Len and Sister Debbie, guest, Sister Debbie and Phil. Lay vocations directors will be Len and Maureen. Right over there, they have it. And they will all be here in the Park Ballroom, along with priests and U.S. communities with less than, and then U.S. communities with less than 50 members is with Sister Nicole. Right over there? Yep, the speaker blocks me. And then that will be in Terrace Room 2. Institutes with international members will be with Brother Ed and Sister Dina. Brother Ed and Sister Dina right there. So that's in Terrace 2. In Terrace 3, religious who entered in 1989 and before. And that is with Sister Gail and Sister Eileen. And Terrace 4, members who have entered after 1990, and that will be with Brother Brian and Sister Kathleen. So Brian's back there. And so as you conclude your time with your questions and sitting with this reflection, I ask you to move towards the group that you feel interested in entering. As a priest, I will obviously have this, so I'll stay, but I entered after 1990, so you can go there afterwards if you want, and examples like that. And so just to let you know. These groups are also found in page 14 of your worship aid.